What up, and welcome back to Pnoid News. Man, listen, I was driving down the road today, and a Gray Mirror article popped up on Skeptical Waves YouTube channel. I hit it, and I was like, blown away by this. Like 100, I was just flabbergasted. So I want to bring it to y'all because, like, I'll be honest with you. I've been looking for words and labels to describe what it is that I am trying to tell y'all. And I'll be honest with you. At this point, I honestly believe there's individuals just listening to me because, like, they're actually just literally saying the things that I've been saying. And this is the first time I'm hearing anybody talk about the shit that I do. Right? So, like, let's get into this, right? Because this is fucking fascinating. All right, so this is from yesterday. Policies of the Deep Right. It's on Gray Mirror, right? We're going to read over it. We're going to break some of this down. And I, like, pay attention, right? Because, like, this here, if I'm being real with you, this is something that, you know, you are going to have those glasses from They Live after this for some things, right? Because there's, like, some fascinating fucking parts of this. So let's get into it. Policies of the Deep Right. The only way for democracy to defeat oligarchy is to elect a monarchy. In a since deleted tweet, Matthew Iglesias says, asked over that tablet oil painting, what are these new right freaks even for? Like, what are their ideas? I feel like I'm not smart enough to understand these things to this level of abstraction and need someone to tell me at some point what specific things these people actually want to do. I love it when people younger than me sound like such boomers. He maybe even read all about the principles of the Deep Right and still didn't get it, of course. How could he? Honestly, it's hard to blame the poor guy. It's hard to see how most of this stuff even makes any sense in this frame of reference. It's like trying to explain acid to a Mormon, but let me try. Oligarchy and relative policy. Of course, I have no ideas at all. Not in Iglesias' sense of the term, at least. The model of political discourse in which public policy ideas are relevant because they are prestigious and prestigious because they are relevant is the mode of discourse fundamental to the ordinary liberal pundit's frame of reference. Ideas outside of this cycle do not matter and cannot be either relevant or prestigious. They are not ideas. Think Mike Rowe, right, when he talks about dirty jobs and, you know, like all these type of things, right? So, you know, when you stand here and you go, like, maybe you shouldn't go to college, maybe you should stand here, you know what I mean, and become, you know, like a truck driver or a welder or whatever the case might be, right? When you say this, it isn't prestigious, right? It isn't coming out of a college. It's coming out of a guy who, you know, in the end of the day is, you know what I mean, like advocating for individuals to work. And the oligarchic individuals aren't interested in that. So there's not a prestigious idea. So therefore, it's not a relevant idea to them. A key aspect of this model is the relative nature of the idea. The idea is a change or a delta from the present state of affairs. The greater this delta, the less relevant. We can speak of an art of relative public policy which describes what not the state should do, but what the state could change to do. Often not very realistically. Matthew Iglesias is a certified wonk in this fine, important art of relative public policy. But relative public policy is specific to the second of three Aristotelian forms of government, which makes sense, as that form happens to be the form we have now. The second form is called oligarchy, the rule of the few. Confusingly, its proponents call it democracy. This is fascinating when you start really thinking about it. Because when you hear the news talk about we're losing our democracy, they're not talking about they're losing their oligarchy, right? That's fascinating. Sorry, I had to cough, man. I've been sick for like the past 2 days, right? This should be enough to make you confuse it with the third Aristotelian form, democracy, the rule of many, which everyone calls populism. See, there's a reason why Machiavelli, he said, democracy breaks down to anarchy, right? Republics break down to oligarchies, and monarchies break down to despotism, right? So basically, the problem is that populism causes anarchy, right? And they're trying to control populism because they want to maintain the oligarchy. So when they're talking about democracy, they don't really mean democracy, which is fucking fascinating when you think about it. Democracy is politics. It means putting politicians in charge of the government. To the ordinary liberal pundit, no idea is more horrifying. Imagine giving the president the power to hire or fire, fund or defund, organize or reorganize any department in D.C. Imagine making Donald Trump the literal CEO of the executive branch. Okay, this is exactly what it says in the Constitution. But come on, isn't it a living Constitution? Yeah, so like literally like you're supposed to be the executive of the executive branch, right? You're supposed to be the chief executive of the executive branch. Like, you know, that's what the president's supposed to be, right? By the Constitution. But like we don't really live by the Constitution, so therefore it's something else completely. Instead, when we want a foreign policy, we consult respected foreign policy experts, professors at top schools, of course. Who should we consult? Plumbers? Hotel entrepreneurs? Duh. Such as oligarchy, the hereditary creed of Matthew Iglesias. Are these top schools mentioned in the Constitution? Enumerated even? Why, of course not. Why would they need to be? Cease to talk to us of your Constitution. We have one of our own, and ours actually says what it means. Here's ear kind worm. I don't really know what the fuck that means, to be perfectly honest with you. But oligarchy, monarchy, and absolute publicly. But oligarchy and democracy are only two of Aristotle's three forms. The third is the first form, monarchy, the rule of one, which we call dictatorship, which is bad. It's bad. Even though monarchy is the most common political form in history, it is invisible from within our present historical bubble. It does fit in our Overton window. It does not fit in our Overton window. Is the problem with the thing or with the window? One does make one think. Both oligarchy and democracy are traditionally hostile to monarchy. However, monarchy and oligarchy can be united by a shared contempt for democracy, and monarchy and democracy can be an ally to defeat rapacious oligarchies. And this term rapacious oligarchy, right? I hear this often from guys like Jimmy Dore, right? Which is kind of strange that, you know, like if you go far enough left, you end up right. You go far enough right, you end up left. It's a strange thing. Hang on one second. Had to blow my nose. All right. In any case, the transition from oligarchy to monarchy is not accomplished by the victory. Any alliance is possible. Any two of the firms together will usually defeat the third. In any case, the transition from oligarchy to monarchy is not accomplished by the victory of monarchical ideas in the oligarchic marketplace of ideas, because no regime change happens by itself. The idea of monarchy must compete somehow in either both the oligarchic and democratic marketplaces. A hard trick indeed. Monarchical public policy, however, is irrelevant until monarchy is established. Its ideas cannot be expected to succeed in the oligarchic marketplace, nor is any such success in the way of monarchy comes about. History shows that the marketplace of ideas is never flat. It's always tilted towards power. Monarchies, oligarchies, and democracy promote different kinds of ideas, while oligarchical regimes do, in a sense, argue themselves into public policies. It is useless to argue monarchical policies in an oligarchical marketplace of ideas. They will look like bad ideas. In a sense, they are bad ideas under the current form. So our first idea has to be a change of form, a regime change. A regime change is always relevant because regime change is always possible, though never safe. The only form that power in a regime change is democracy, but the only form that can operate in the next regime is monarchy. Therefore, the process of legal regime change must involve electing a monarchy, not unlike the election of FDR in 1932. Operationally, monarchy is required because the regime change is hard, and everything hard that works in this world, running a company, directing a movie, cooking a meal, is done by a unified authority with a single leader at the top. That is a monarchy. So every company, that you can think of, actually has like an executive on top of it. You know what I mean? Right? Anyway, but it is not even that democracy is a terrible way to manage everything. Populist democracy in the age of apathetic, uninformed voters is not even strong enough to keep the power in its hands, let alone do the right thing with it. Monarchy, however, is well known for being able to keep the power in its hands. Thus, the only way for democracy today to defeat oligarchy is to elect a monarchy. What's cool is that this is actually completely legal. Even if it wasn't, we could do it at any time. Like FDR, or even Caesar, the next monarch may not call himself a king and probably should not. People will call him a dictator. People will call him whatever. It is what it is. But it's worth noting that the American system of government, which combines monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy, electing a dictator is a law of the land. By our own ancient constitution, the voters elect the chief executive of the executive branch. It is an old tradition, but that the president automatically defers to the other branches in managing his executive branch. But this deference is just a tradition. It is not in the Constitution itself. If a tradition is not working for us, why are we obliged to keep it? Even if Marbury versus Madison is 2 centuries old, might not be wrongly decided. Even historian reads Justice Marshall's coup as a coup, not some divine exegesis. I don't know. Any such change of form will bring a new market for public policy. The newly elected monarch is elected in vain unless he can completely revise the standard practices, policy, personnel, philosophy, and organization of the old regime. In most cases, he will probably not even start from the status quo. He will create a new structure from scratch. Only minimal continuity of staff is required, mainly in the security forces. In this alternative reality, relative public policy is of no interest at all. The only form of public policy that offers any interest is absolute public policy. The policy choices that are available to any new regime, regardless of the old regime's standards, practices, policy, personnel, philosophy, and organization. So, basically, you're just starting over. In general, absolute public policy is a natural accompaniment to absolute regime change. Historical instances of absolute public policies are not hard to find, even in the lives of those now living, and even those regarded as good. One example is the U.S. occupation of Germany after the war, AMGOT. AMGOT, which begat modern Germany. Say what you want about modern Germany, but it is at least in some senses a success. Had absolutely no interest in preserving the Third Reich standards, practices, policies, personnel, philosophy, or organizations. In some cases it did. It certainly never wanted to, and for the most part it didn't. And AMGOT was an absolute as a regime as the Third Reich itself. It even burned books. Furthermore, politics is the art of the possible, and until the art of the absolute policy in the modern world is at least mapped, if not yet explored, there is a limit to how far it can be explored in the lab. A democratic monarchical regime change is possible. Since it has no policy roadmap, it will fail. Since it will fail, it will never happen. All right, so I talk about this often. I'm like, hey, look, if we want people to root for a change, we have to give them something to change to, right? I think that's kind of fucking important when it comes down to it. Stranger things have come to pass, and needless to say, this is all this absolute policy making is very legal and very cool. As Bill Ayers once put it, America is a great country. Salus populi suprema lex. What does absolute public policy look like anyway? Many readers presumably still think I am dodging this important question of what am I for? And maybe I am. Before the age of legalistic oligarchical manuals of absolute public policy were widely published, they were called mirrors for princes. Gray Mirror, which is, the website we're on, right, his Substack, comes from this term. Machiavelli's The Prince is technically in this genre, though its ironic and amoral tone is very atypical. More medieval works are very sincere, moralistic, and even spiritual. Anyone seeking a program for a 21st century monarchy would do much worse than to consult these kind of sources, rather than 20th century economics and social sciences. But the pre-revolutionary consensus on the purpose of government is quite consistent. It fits in a Latin motto, Salus populi suprema lex. The health of the people is a supreme law. By Salus populi, we might as well say common good, the favorite mantra of another corner of the New Right. The purpose of the king is to preserve and improve the health of the people, not just their physical health, but their spiritual health, their general well-being. All things that I've been talking about. The general well-being of the population is the sum of the individual well-being of each subject. Oligarchies and democracies have citizens who either have public power or, more often, the semblance of powers. Monarchies have subjects who look after themselves. So This kind of gets into the Robert Von Dunn, right? Which is a writer who was he wrote about how during the Middle Ages, or like after the fall of the Roman Empire, the individuals kind of just lived among themselves. And like there was monarchies, there was like kings and stuff, but they stood here and literally just left the people to do what the fuck it is they wanted to do, right? And they took care of themselves. The purpose of a king is to salus populi or common good sounds boring and obvious, but it's not as boring or obvious taken seriously. It is alien and revolutionary. Foreign policy. The purpose of a regime is to preserve and improve the health of its own people. To take an interest in improving the rest of the world is to create a conflict of interest. Just as the manager of your condo complex's homeowner association, if he sends the landscaping funds to Yemen to feed starving toddlers, remains an embezzler. A HOA is not a charity, neither is a government. Any such conflict of interest creates an incentive for the regime to act against its own subjects. This is a bad habit for governments. As for the people of Yemen, they should be looked after by the government of Yemen, which should be a dependency, satellite, or protectorate of the U.S. or any other nation northwest of, say, like Egypt, right? Right? Like it should not be a dependency, you know what I mean? Or like fucking a satellite or a protectorate of the United States, like legit. In a 20th century terminology, therefore, a healthy U.S. monarchy will be isolationist. It will abandon its current empire, not at all unlike Gorbachev's disregarding the Soviet Empire, and lovingly tend its own garden. And defend itself if need be. The idea of military attack on the U.S. remains comical, but only the dead have seen the end of war. Certainly, space remains an active field of international conflict, as does drone warfare. But America's main defense job today, which of course it is screwing up, is to achieve a permanent domination of orbit. With Musk's giant rocket, we might still have a chance. Yay, America. Right? Economics. 20th century regimes with mostly terrible results embraced a weird economic idea that the purpose of the economic planner is to maximize the total consumer price of all the goods and services that the economy produces. This is called GDP, gross domestic product. And an increase in it is called growth. To paraphrase Edward Abbey, tumors also grow. The purpose of economic management is this growth, and once it has been adjusted for the growth in prices, then adjusted again to reflect hedonic changes in price-quality ratio, it is the much desired real growth. This form of numerology has never been known before the 20th century. Yet weavers still spun, and farmers still raise pigs. The theory of real growth is that the measures of the amount of utility that producers produce, as Wikipedia tells us, a measure of pleasure or happiness. When we measure GDP, we are measuring literally in numbers, the quantity of total human desire that all the producers in the country satisfied that year. Of course, some desire food where others desire caviar. And what is their ratio of value? By the kilogram. How much better are sturgeon eggs and chicken eggs? How much more valuable would chickens be genetically engineered to lay beluga? This would be growth indeed. To see how much growth, just check the market price. Yet the caloric value of these commodities is roughly equal. What is especially interesting about this GDP frame to is its relationship to another California craze of the 20th century, Buddhism. As everyone knows, the Buddhists too spoke of desire. In fact, Buddhists believe, just like modern economists, that the purpose of life is to conquer desire. And the only way to truly conquer desire, like the Buddha said, is to satisfy it completely. Oh, wait, he didn't. He actually didn't say that. More like the opposite. But anyway, where were we? Of course, the appeal of metrics like GDP is their quantitative measurable quality. They suggest what Thomas Carlyle called a government carried on by steam. There is a real merit in quantitative governance, but not if, when gained, it creates a disaster. Government by GDP, invented in the UK and US, has led both nations to rationally destroy their own industrial bases, like the bombing of Germany, but self-inflicted. At least no white phosphorus was used, though in some places in the Rust Belt, one might think it was. Again, I've been talking about this for months. Like, legit, they're listening to me, bro. Like, real shit. Motherfuckers is hearing what I'm saying. Though in some places in the a well-managed economy does not have a Rust Belt. One alternative which might persuade the next regime is the human asset model. The government literally treats itself like a corporation whose assets are human robots. If besides the land and buildings, the assets of these corporations are human beings, the goal is not to maximize the hedonic production of the corporation. That would be like a CEO running a company to maximize revenue. Sometimes this is right, but only by accident. It is more right to maximize profit, but even this can be a management mistake. The real goal is to maximize valuation, and when choosing between real capitalization and mere market price, choose the former. The company is worth the thing it owns. The more they are worth, the more it is. When these things are human beings, they should still be as valuable as possible. Without an active slave market, there is no way to measure human value. But any way of measuring human value will at least look similar to our goal, the salus populi. Consider, for instance, the question of work. According to both macroeconomics economics and Reddit, the value of work is negative. Work is defined by disutility, so the less work Americans do, the better. According to this Reddit Harvard libertarian theory of government, if the Chinese are willing to do all the work and make our stuff in exchange for pieces of green paper, they are suckers and we should let them. We get all the utility, they get the disutility and some paper. What's not to like? Well, this idea conflicts with traditional common sense on the human asset model. Let me go 1 second. Common sense tells us that work is good for the human soul. The human asset model tells us that the regime work in most cases is good for the human asset. It increases the productive powers of the asset, which may not be quite exactly the salus populi, but at least it correlates with the common good better than the satisfaction of desire. And on the scale of nation, producing increases the nation's productive power, obviously making the nation stronger and more valuable. Whereas any nation that consumes but does not produce can be just dropped on its face by the producers. Imagine America to the Chinese container ship just sailed to the international date line, dumped the containers into Marianas Trench and stamped their own green paper. What would change for the Chinese? The stamps on their bond? China, of course, invented paper money. What would change for the Americans? Without either consumer goods or an infrastructure to manufacture consumer goods, hopefully at least you have a gun, probably no shortage there. Pre-liberal economists consider the basic task of an economic planner to be the equalization of labor supply and demand, in such a way that production satisfied the human needs of all consumers, and consumption created demand for the human labor of all producers. The goods should fit in the consumer. The work should fit the worker. Ideally, everyone is working up to and developing the limits of their human ability. Of course, not all humans are born with the same talents or limits. The goal of matching supply and demand is often easily accomplished by restricting supply. For example, by restricting trade, mercantilism, or restricting technology, elitism. An especially promising approach to the creation of labor demand is restricting old technology. For example, textile automation, thereby creating a market for high quality, high dignity, artisanal labor. Obviously, a skilled artisan is by any metric a more valuable asset than a welfare client or a bullshit job paper pusher. Needless to say, this kind of policy makes no sense in the 20th century liberal economist. This is why flying from Shanghai to New York feels like flying from New York to Rio. There is no zeroth world. You don't live in it. Instead, you live in free trade hell, or heaven if you happen to work for Apple. One way to understand the impact of technology on economics is to compare tech to natural resource like oil. Economists know the resource curse that afflicts a nation which 5 guys can pump the entire national GDP up from a hole in the ground. Similarly, WhatsApp once served almost 1 billion users with a mere 30 engineers. We're part of the deep right now. As technology advances, every labor market loses labor demand, even engineers. There is no force of nature which guarantees every human a positive marginal product. People can simply be worthless, not just by the very young, the very old, and the very sick, but great swaths of physically healthy society. The final implication of liberal economics is genocide, figurative or literal. If you look at the Rust Belt, you see it. Hiroshima is certainly looking a lot better than Detroit these days. Let me read that again. If you look at the Rust Belt, you see it. Hiroshima is certainly looking better than Detroit these days. The final implication of liberal economics is genocide. Jeez, man, listen. Like, yo, amazing. So if it ever came, every time we fondle our Benjamins, we should consider Obi-Wan Ben Franklin's racist anti-German rants. The time for a homogenous America is over. Our continent is as mongrel as the pound. It's not exactly Iceland. And without getting our hands very messy indeed, it never will be. And the real Iceland is probably rife with anti-Eskimo prejudice or something, man. Humans, man. But will a sensible regime, a government that genuinely loves and cares and wants to nourish its precious human assets, work with human nature? Or will it try to change human nature? Well, if it's the 20th century. North America is full of many different kinds of people. Some of these kinds of people are organized in well-delineated cultural communities. Some are not. But whatever your culture, a capable regime will value and cherish and respect it. Try not to wreck it or homogenize it with some other culture. Jesus fucking Christ. Literally, I was just arguing about this with Fire and motherfucking the politics fucking server today. I was literally just arguing about this. For example, one crucial mark of a successful polycultural regime is that it respects the rights of every culture to educate its own children by default and without penalty in its own ways and tradition. Violating this principle is not exactly the Holocaust, but it does fit Raphael Lemkin's original definition of genocide, just to let you know. In general, a culture should be governed by its own members under its own rules. Strict geographic separation is not needed for this millet or pillar system, though it tends to develop anyway. There is little to be gained by geographic but not cultural homogenization of disparate populations. But it is perfectly possible for human beings to live cheek to jowl with other human beings who are governed differently. For fuck's sake, the relations between all these cultures should be amicable and financially neutral. Economic exchange between cultures should have neutral trade balance, easily implemented by distinguishing between internal and external currencies. No culture should be dependent on or dominant over another, financially or otherwise. Please, just please, can we do this? One of the most important cultures in any nation today is the post-cultural globalist culture. This is the most valuable of all cultures in human asset terms. Also the most dangerous. It is just as important to treat these people well as to keep them in check. The regime that fails at either of these tasks has numbered its days. Globalists are just another religion or culture. They are not special. They are in the oligarchical. Their belief system has become state religion. Globalists are just another religion or culture. They are not special. In their oligarchy, their belief system has become a state religion, almost a total religion. It was as if we had been ruled by Byzantine monks, and declaring that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the sun could get you kicked off from Twitter and out of elementary school. While every private religion can become a state religion and vice versa, not only is there nothing wrong with these people, when they are bad, they are very bad. When they are good, they are really quite good. But power is a hell of a drug. Excluding them from power will clear their heads and even cure many of their strange doctrines. It seems like a harsh treatment to be addicted. Withdrawal is punishment by definition. But in the long run, it'll even be good for their souls, the salus populi. And does any group of people have any right to political power over any other group? The short answer is no. Mormons have the right to rule themselves. They do not have the right to rule you. You do not have the right to rule them. This stuff is pretty fucking simple. People have a right to rule themselves. They do not have a right to rule you. You do not have a right to rule them. This stuff is pretty simple. The accountable monarchy. It is easy to describe the purpose of a good king. But why should a king be good? What keeps a good king good? What if he's crazy? Or worse, goes crazy? One answer is simply to note for some reason monarchies, dictatorships in the 20th century had a usually bad record of bad behavior. We could discard this as a run of data or as outlier produced by some pattern related to time rather than form, or we could obsess over it. And after all, even if this is patterns unrelated to form, why should it not still be operating today? Understanding the 20th century, a long conversation to say the least, is the only way to untangle this puzzle. But if we discard the 20th century as an outlier, we see that most monarchs are rather sane. Radically, they do go crazy and start exploding whole swaths Rarely do they go crazy and start executing whole swaths of their population. They may not be good at preserving the Salus populi, but they usually at least try. And they are often in the war, a failure mode worth noticing. It is also possible to do much better at monarchical succession than in olden days. If nothing else, because fertility medicine, Henry VIII's situation need never occur. This is a modest answer which acknowledges the frailty and imperfection of human affairs and demands recognition of extreme perfection and clear deterioration of present affairs. But I also have my own design for building a technically accountable monarchy, a sovereign version of corporate governance implemented sadly on the blockchain. Summarizing this novelty here, though, would be tiresome and distracting. In any case, the question is not open because the law is clear. The American system of government, as outlined in the Constitution, is an elective dictatorship in which the voters select the next absolute dictator for the next 4 years. Is it perfect? No. But this country has muddled its way through imperfect before. It may not be the perfect way to hold a national CEO accountable, but if the changes that every voter sees with their own eyes over 4 years, as long as it took to win World War II, do not amaze and impress them, maybe this is not the right national CEO for a nation after all. Joe DiNaggio, our nation turns its lonely eyes on you. And Tom Pease is going to turn this motherfucker off and go get his food. Y'all know the deal. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace.